With the precision of a Swiss watch, we're back for live EE Times coverage of the 2011 DesignCon from Santa Clara Convention Center. Again, I'm your happy and increasingly hoarse host, Brian Fuller, editorial director for EE Life, and our next segment has two of the coolest dudes in the industry who have a big teardown today. So if you're nearby and you're stuck in Cube Land, Santa Clara, San Jose, Milpitas, get out and come down because at 3 o'clock these guys are going to be tearing down the Kinect. So I'm gonna introduce them now. On my immediate right is Kyle Wiens, who's CEO of the very excellent site iFixit, and next to him is the legendary Brian Dipert,
in his own mind,
consumer electronics editor from EDN, who's now my brother, not literally, but because we merged EDN, EE Times.
I was wondering where you're going with that. Now I understand.
I have something to tell you. It involves your father. Sorry. So let's talk about the Kinect. You guys are tearing down the Microsoft Kinect. It was the hottest consumer buy at Christmas. You got people jumping around inside their houses. I happen to think, and I think you agree, that they should be out running outside, but that's another thing.
Better jumping around in their house than doing nothing at all, I suppose.
Exactly.
Right.
So, so tell me about it. What have you guys learned? Give us something that you're going to talk about.
Well, so I'll give you a baseline overview of how it works, and then maybe you can chime in on some of the internals. The Kinect projects an infrared grid onto the room that you're in. It's a series of lights. It looks like a laser pointer times 1,000. And it then the infrared camera, just an infrared IR filter on the camera, detects the points and measures the distance between each point, and that's how it's able to create a depth map of the room. So the deliverable of the Xbox is really just a sensor module. What it transmits to the Xbox are two video streams. One is a depth map video stream, like a bump map that you would have if you're doing graphics work. And then it also sends a 640 by 480 VGA video, which is also used for some of the kinematic detection, but is primarily used for some of the Kinect games like to take snapshots of you as you're jumping up and down and doing stupid things. And so the combination of those two then allows Microsoft to build a full body model of you. And in some games you can have multiple people play, but I think the resolution limits that a little bit. And so we've seen primarily the more interesting games have one person playing at a time. And the sensor has a motor in it that pivots up and down and left, right. And so it tracks where you're at and makes sure that it always has you in center frame. So pretty interesting combination of a relatively low-tech technologies to get a video stream of information that a gaming console has never had before.
Did you get one for Christmas?
we bought one for our office. When we did the teardown, we were so eager, we bought two, one for the office and one to take apart, and then we eventually did put back the one, so we had two that were functional. But yeah, absolutely, and it's a blast.
So, Mr. Dipert, tell me
sir.
about your impressions on the design, the trade-offs that you saw in there.
There's some interesting stuff in the design. There's Microsoft partnered with a company called PrimeSense, which came out of Israel, to do the basic infrared depth map technology that he talked about. And the PrimeSense IC also has optional inputs for visible light sensor, as well as there are several microphones in the system as well for audio capture and for ambient noise suppression. But when you tear it apart, there is a functionally seemingly redundant Marvell SoC in there as well. Mm-hmm. And I have some theories as to why they did that. I think Microsoft has potential applications for Kinect beyond the console itself. Of course, they also didn't want to load down the console at all. Frame rate and response time is everything, and you don't want to do anything that would kill that. So they do a lot of pre-processing in Kinect. Also, you've got to think about the fact that USB bandwidth, USB 2 bandwidth is limited, and there's other stuff that's streaming across that. You could have a Wi-Fi adapter there, you could have headsets, you could have other controllers that are streaming data there. So as much processing as you can do in Kinect before you send the data to the console, the better. So I think that's fundamentally why that's there.
Only one of the USB ports on the Xbox works with the Kinect. The other one doesn't
Right.
have the bandwidth.
Is it bandwidth? It's
Yeah,
bandwidth
it's
and it's
bandwidth.
power as well, right?
Yeah, well, they have a separate power adapter that plugs into the USB, so
Right.
I don't think it's because the power is shunted into the connection. But
Do you have one of the newer generation consoles?
Yeah.
Because I've got one of the old ones, and there's this
Right,
convoluted process
yes.
that you have to work through to get it
Right.
to work. The other thing that was intriguing to me about the design is that it's a gyro, right? That's in there.
I think it's just an accelerometer.
It's
Just to
accelerometer.
detect, and it detects when you bump it because it is. And we've had this happen. We're jumping up and down, and it knocks it off the TV. The vibrations of the floor. So it detects when it's been moved, and then it says, "Oh, I need to recalibrate." And I think that's primarily what it's for. It may also be to help it calibrate as it pans and tilts.
And it also compensates for if it's installed in a less than perfect orientation, correct?
Yeah.
It's like on my TV, it's a little bit crooked. I've got one of those brackets that mounts it to the back of the TV,
Okay.
and it compensates for that as well. So there's some really interesting technology in it. The bill of materials cost estimates I've seen for it are in the $50+ range.
Really?
And you add in, there was substantial R&D on the project going all the way back to Microsoft Labs, where they did voice recognition and stuff, the marketing costs, the manufacturing costs, the distribution costs, the retailer markups, the game that's included, all of that added together. Microsoft, my guess is they're probably best case breaking even, if not losing a little bit on it. And it's one of the interesting business implications for me is that consoles have long been sold under this razors and blades model, where
Yeah.
you sell the console below cost and then hopefully make up your money in content. This is perhaps the first time that that's been done for a peripheral, right? Because really what this does is it reboots the console.
Yes.
Xbox 360 is almost 6 years old at this point. It was introduced in November of 2005, and there's not a next generation Xbox coming out anytime soon that any of us are aware of. But really, what this does is refreshes and reboots the console.
So, so very cool technology. You can very easily extrapolate what it will be like in the future in a mobile world where it's enabling certain behaviors and applications.
Mm-hmm.
This is a wall plug-in thing. It's got power issues, no doubt. What's your take on what's it going to take to migrate this technology into the mobile space quickly and not, melt the backplane?
So the device was thermal limited. It has a fan in it. The entire device is designed to move airflow through it, and they have heat sinks. And I think it's primarily, and you can tell me what you think of the ICs, I think the primary heat generator is that infrared transmitter.
Right.
That is, I think the mechanics of that, and it'll be interesting to see if now that they have enough unit volume, they can create enough incentive for somebody to design a more efficient, thermally efficient IR transmitter. But that thing generates a fair amount of heat, sucks some power, and so I don't know. I mean, this sort of thing, the calibration of and having to have that base stable relative to where you're at, seems like it would be a challenge to work in a mobile environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if some of it also was intentional design overkill on Microsoft's part after the Red Ring of Death problems that they had with the console itself in the first couple iterations of the design. They wanted to make sure that there would be absolutely no thermal problems this time around. But I agree with them. The IR transmitter is definitely the predominant heat generating source. All the other stuff is fairly low power, and could, I would imagine, within a couple litho iterations, be in a mobile environment. There's certainly there is some attractiveness to doing proximity detection and UI manipulation based on that. There are other ways to do it. I mean, with traditional capacitive sensors, if you get close enough, you don't have to actually touch. So it's one of a number of different approaches.
So very cool. Again, if you're around, these guys are on at 3 in the Chiphead Theater at the Santa Clara Convention Center. If you're not, we're going to be videotaping it, and we'll have an archived version of it at some point in the next decade or so on eetimes.com. And before we close, I think it'd be good to hear about what you're doing at iFixit, because your business is very cool, very interesting, and it must be a blast.
It is absolutely a blast. So we get to take apart all sorts of things. Our goal is to teach everybody how to take apart and fix all the stuff that they own. And we have teardowns, which are sort of a first look inside gizmos. When something new like the Kinect comes out, we take it apart, we post photos. And if you're interested in seeing what the Kinect looks like and you won't be able to come today, go to iFixit.com, search for Kinect, and it will pull up our teardown, which has high-resolution images of everything all the way down to the IC level. So what we are trying to do is build sort of a Wikipedia of repair manuals. We think that people deserve to know how to fix everything that they have, all the way from their iPhone to their laptop to how to replace the brakes in your car. Yeah. And we have step-by-step photos that are contributed by the community, by people just like you and me that are, have a little time on the weekend, or we're fixing something anyway, and so we take some photos, upload them to the site, and that's the start of a repair manual. Because the manufacturers have not deigned to provide us with information on how to work on their own hardware. And so we're in the situation where Ford has service manuals for the car, but they're not willing to provide it to the owner. And Apple has service manuals for the iPhone, but they're not willing to provide it to us. So we come along and we say, okay, well, that's fine. We can crowdsource the development of those service manuals and make it available. And we've helped millions of people fix their own devices. We have moms replacing batteries and iPods for kids. But even more exciting, we have kids replacing batteries and iPods for their moms. And
nice.
So what we're doing is sort of bringing the engineering perspective of, well, of course we can solve this. It's a problem, let's solve it. I have something broken, I'm going to fix it. Well, that is unique to the engineering culture that has made this industry great. And we need to spread that knowledge, spread that ethos to the rest of society. And I think in doing that, we will get more and more young people coming into the industry. And my background's computer science, and we see fewer and fewer people going into computer science every year. And that's really a shame, because it's a phenomenal field.
Yeah, so fight the good fight.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great idea. And last but not least, Mr. Dipert has one of the most popular blogs in the entire Western world, Brian's Brain, which, by the way, if you Google Brian's Brain...
But not the Eastern world?
Not the Eastern world, because it's in English, and there's a whole translation problem, because Google translation isn't as effective as you think it is. But if you Google Brian's Brain, a woman who is much bustier and arguably more attractive than you shows up, and she sells handbags. So that must be killing your SEO.
I obviously have to Google Brian's Brain because I didn't know that happened.
With a Z. Or an S. Anyway, so...
I don't know what to say, Brian.
Neither do I at this point, except what were your takeaways from CES? Because that's your big show of the year. You went there.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So, last year, everybody had an e-book reader, right? This year, everybody has an Android tablet. Next year, I'm not exactly sure what it was going to be, what it will be, but that's that. Everybody's going after the iPad. And there were some interesting products, and a lot of ones that pretty obviously will fall off the vine rather quickly. I think after last year's big hype over 3D, one of the write-ups I did after the show said, after the binge, it's the hangover, which doesn't mean that the party's over at all, but I think there's reality creeping in to the situation. But 3D is something that will be necessary in order to keep the movie industry treadmill going. So I don't think it's going to fade away again like it did back in the 50s, but it's going to take a while. There's the whole glasses versus non-glasses controversy, but you look at Panasonic's booth, for example, and 3D was everywhere. It had a massive presence. Sony was pushing it hard. I think there's enough industry momentum behind it that they're going to make sure that it happens to at least some degree. But it was. I think it was a much more pragmatic show than in shows that I've attended before, where it was really heavy on hype, and most of the stuff you looked at and you knew it wasn't going to be around in 3 months.
Pragmatic.
Well, we saw a lot of hardware. We saw a lot of tablets. Mm-hmm. The problem was the lack of software for the tablets.
Right.
So all the hardware is basically ready and I think on hold, waiting for Honeycomb, waiting
Right.
for Google to release the next version of Android.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a unique. I felt like the elephant in the room at CES was Google, who wasn't really there. The only company that was demoing the new version of Android at all was Motorola on the Zoom tablet, and everything else we're just sort of waiting.
And always the other elephant in the room is Apple, who's never there.
Right.
So,
All right, well, Brian Dipert, Kyle Wiens, thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing your teardown at 3 o'clock in the Chiphead Theater. We're going to take a break of about 3 minutes, 2 minutes maybe, because our next guest is coming up. And we'll be back live streaming from 2011 DesignCon in Santa Clara, California. So stay tuned. Go get a cup of coffee.